Welcome back now as we start to think about Christmas and how we're going to celebrate the festive season. Our next guest and resident folklore, Shane Lahan, wishes to highlight a number of essential and almost forgotten aspects of the Christmas period. The board game. Oh. I don't know about you, but we always take our board games at Christmas.
You know, isn't it funny? My brother Barry, he always, my father, when he was getting the Christmas together, but Barry, perhaps because he was the most intelligent of all of us, right, he would get this thing called the compendium of games. Always and ever. Every year he got it. Whatever happened from year to year. But inside it, of course, would be the chess, would be the drafts, would be backgammon, dominoes, ludo, all of the games. And of course, on Christmas then, we'd be around the table. And of course, we'd have one game or another would be playing, you know. And it's something I was thinking about, that these are things that are found all over the world. These have been going on in every place. And there's a great antiquity to these games, especially around this time of the year, because between, we'll say, Halloween and Bridget's Day, between Samhain and Imbolc, we're kind of in this kind of dark period, and people's fortunes are always being worked out, you know. You always wanted to win, you were in competition with someone and so on, you know. But like, it's interesting that if you go right back in time, people played actually with bones and buttons, and they played on kind of checkered patterns, you know. Quite often they might have a gansy, or they might have an old covering or whatever, and they would put it out, and those squares, as it were the items that were used, you know. And it's funny, isn't it? We think about even the dice that we have, the die that were there long ago. You always had two, right? We had an 8 cup long ago. You'd always have to shake it like that, you know. You'd throw it out, and people would often work out, you know, look, I got a double 5 there now. It was fairly good. But, you know, one of the games that I think that goes into the compendium of games that I really like is actually snakes and ladders, you know. And I was doing some research on this. I thought it was interesting that, believe it or not, this came to us from India, probably came over from with the Raj, with returning all the colonial powers that were there and so on.
Is that the Indian one there, Shane, we're seeing?
That's it exactly. And it began, funnily enough, as a game of karma. It was actually a religious idea, because if you like, the snakes were all the vices. You know, you had everything from your ego, vanity, sex, all of those, they were the things that came sliding down the snake as well. But if you were good living, and if you're full of prayer, and if you were full of your conscience, they were the ladders by which you went up. So, and if you would, the plane of Shiva was on the top, and of course this was, but once it came back to Great Britain, we'll say, to the British Isles, they forgot about all the religious aspect, and it just became...
But there was a kind of life was on that board as well, because 100 was, you wanted to get the 100, but after times you'd land on 99.
Listen...
And what happens when you land on 99, you're
all the way back down.
You go all the way back down again.
No, this was the worst. 95 brought you down to 22, which was kind of like, that was a fairly big drop into the end. But I found what's interesting as well is that then there was chess. So we often think about chess, but there's something really interesting about the game of chess. And again, I speak about my brother Barry. I went off to Perth not too long ago, a few years back, and I was lucky when I went there, because there was an exhibition on in Perth, a history of the world in 100 objects. And when I went in there, I was looking at all these objects. One stood out for me, and it was a chess piece. A chess piece that had been found on the Isle of Lewis in Scotland back in the 1830s, 1831 or something of that sort. Magnificent, carved out of walrus ivory, funnily enough, okay, a walrus ivory and whale teeth, okay, a Viking game, and it was really intriguing to see these fantastic. So there you have, for example, look at the guy there with his shield, and he's a berserker. He's a wild figure altogether. He's so angry, he's biting his shield to keep himself kind of quiet, as it were.
The detail is fabulous.
Aren't they fantastic? And do you know, when I was looking at these, I went to the British Museum in London to look at the full collection that was there. But I never knew we actually had our own chess piece from Ireland as well, found in a place called in Clonard in County Meath, inside in a bog. This magnificent chess pieces that were there. But look, what's on screen at the moment is something even more exciting, because rather than the original official game of chess, this is the game of what we call Fidchell.
And what does that mean then?
Okay, so the first part actually means wisdom, and Ciel is the wood, or this is actually wood wisdom, or the board game that's there, and also called Brandove. Brandove, of course, was the rook, if you like, the black rook. She was often a figure within our mythology who kind of foretold doom and gloom for kings and so on. But the traditions behind this, because in our mythology, what we know is that this game was played regularly in Ireland. This one came from a Cranogue in County Meath. This is the Ballinderry board, a replica of it, I should say. Yeah. So I have this for the last 30, 40 years. And
Was it different to chess though? Because we always called, say, chess fell in Irish.
Yeah,
But it was different from chess, so
absolutely different. And you had the king in the middle here,
Yeah.
okay? And what happened with the king is that the king had to get to one of the four corners, and you could move these fellas any way you wanted. They could move any distance, but to take one of those, you had to have two fellas on either side. And it's rather complicated. The king can only move one step. But what I find really interesting about it is my students, who are tremendous, I have this outside my door of my office. They look up how to play it, and it's an incredibly complex game. And what I love about it is that, for example, in the mythology, the great god Lugh, who's the god of kingship, he invented the game or introduced the game. In addition to that, if you were one of the great figures of authority in the past, in Fostrage, you had to be taught the game. And we even have an account of Tuckmark Etain, the wooing of Etain, Mither and Etain. They fall in love, they take many different shapes. She eventually goes off and has to get married to a guy called Ochi, and Mither wants to woo her back, and he plays the game of Fidchell, and he wins, and the two of them fly off as swans. So it's a complicated tale, but in any case, it shows us that there were high stakes.
Yeah.
And this, to me, is an incredible example of our past.
Wow.
You know, so in terms of board games, we have lots of different things going on. One of the things that I wanted to bring in today were cards, because if you didn't have all of these fancy things, you had the deck of cards, you know.
The deck of cards and drafts I will forever associate with my maternal grandmother.
And at Christmas time, people often take out the deck of cards, and I'd say from boarding schools to seminaries, from convents to every old place of work, people take out the deck of cards. I often think any flat surface at all is ideal for cards. I remember I was looking at a book there recently of Father Prout, the reliquaries of Father Prout, and here they are, look, playing on top of a coffin, for example.
It's unreal.
And they'd often, give a hand as well, of course, to the corpse that was there.
Yeah.
But there were so many games. Beggar My Neighbour, Old Maid, Snap. There was a lovely one called Strip Jack Naked. I don't know what the details of those were, but there was whist, there was bridge, there was donkey, there was one called 33, which was very popular. 33. But the game for me, there was one game, 25, 45 or 110.
Yeah.
Essentially the same game, but depending on where you are in the country, it was played. And people, I would think it should be our national indoor game.
I was at a card table one night, right, and over the other table they were playing high stakes poker, right, and some fella lost 500 quid. I'll never forget it, right? And he didn't bat an eyelid at losing 500 quid, and we were like, my God, he's after losing 500 quid. We were playing 25 not long after it, and the same fella lost a fiver and turned the table upside down. because of the game we were playing 25.
But 25, it's probably one of our oldest games. It goes right back into our medieval past, at least. People played for all sorts of things. Long ago in the medieval past, they used to have a glib. They used to have their hair down over their faces, and sometimes when you were betting, a fella could cut off a bit of a fella's glib. That was a real show that they had won something, you know. But it was called, in Irish, it was called maw. And maw in that time was kind of a trump or a trick or whatever. But also mom, which was literally a hand. And in fact, it's got to do with five fingers. Okay? It's also 5 fingers. It was also called Spoil 5, because if you ever played 25 or 45, it wasn't about winning, it was about stopping somebody else winning.
Yes.
Okay? So that's a real Irish thing, isn't it? Like, we're not interested in winning, we're stopping.
We just don't want you to win.
And he wouldn't but you.
People often played in pairs, and you know, the fellas fell out.
Yeah.
They fell out for 30 or 40 years. They wouldn't speak to each other if a fella put down the wrong trump.
Oh, they would, they'd be shouting at you.
Oh, absolutely.
And in Galway, where we play 9, right? So you have 2 other partners, so there's 3 of you playing together. And trying to read what's happening.
And that's another complication. But you can only play for 25 or 45. You can only have 10 people playing. Because, and again, as I was calling out there, you had the 5, the Jack, the Joker, the Ace of Hearts, the Ace of Trumps. They were the best cards in the whole deck to have. And if anyone got a hand like that, I'm telling you, you were away for.
And in some places, Shane, they play the Joker as well.
Oh, they did.
Where we had now in West Kerry, it's 5 Jack, Joker, Ace of Hearts.
Yes.
But in other places, then it's the Joker, 5 Jack, Ace of Hearts. So there's different rules in different places around Ireland.
There'll be war because, and in parishes and in boundaries. And long ago they used to play for all sorts of things. You know, what I love about it is that, they used to have in particular, a fella might put up what they call spoileens, you know, old leg of mutton, you know, for fellas in shebeens long ago now to get people in. there'd be someone on rubbed at the bonnet, the run to the litter might be put up or something like that. You know, a goose or something like that would be put up. And when people would come in, they'd pay money. They were the gambles, they were called. And they came in, and there was a bit of pride to win on that, you know. And later, of course, it becomes the turkey drive. We'll talk about that in a second. But that's when the whole idea of people cheating came in, you know. And people were thought that certain fellas had certain powers, you know, that they could change the colour or they could change the suit or whatever it might be. And they'd be looking at fellas, if there was 2 ace of hearts came out, all sorts of messing and so on went on. But fellas often put down that their bad luck was bad. So regularly a fella would stand up, he'd walk around his chair 3 times, you know, to get rid of it. He might have to go around the house 3 times before he'd come back in again.
The superstition was strong.
Who you were sitting beside was very important. If that fella had been up to no good that day, if he had killed an animal or something like that, you put it down to the guy who was sitting on your right. It was never your fault.
No, somebody else's fault.
Technically, you know. You had to cut the cards. There was a great riddle on go. What's put on the table, cut and never eaten? A deck of cards. Okay, that was the. But long ago, if someone said you had to cut the cards, if a fella left the cards in his hand to cut, he was taking the luck. You know, there was all of those sort of.
But also you get in fierce trouble for how you cut the cards as well. I remember all that. Carry on. You had to do it a certain way and do it properly.
If you trusted him, you'd tap it.
If you trust him, you tap it. You know, but he'd have to tap it on the table.
On the table.
There's no good tapping it in his hand. He was taking the luck from you. If a cock crew in the middle of the game, you know, some fellas. There was a great schmucked and there was great law and order, and some fellas started at 7 o'clock and they'd finish at 10:30, they'd go home and say the rosary. Other fellas were out all night and you'd be playing until the early hours of the morning, right? So like it depended really, but if the cock crew in the middle of the game, it meant that there was some shenanigans going on. Sometimes even the cock would come down off the roost and he'd scatter the cards everywhere. Everyone knew that there was some shenanigans going on in the game then, you know. But what was also very interesting is that you might win the old turkey. Like turkey drives came really from this. And winning the turkey was something that people absolutely loved to do. But the turkey wasn't dead. The turkey was alive, see? So you'd have the turkey then and you'd have it under your arm going home. And of course the fella might be well on and he might lose the turkey, you see, and there'd be all talk the next day as to what happened. But the most famous ghost that we have relating to this was the turkey ghost. Because a lot of fellas, when we talk about gambling, a lot of fellas were out every night. They were out playing 25 and 45. They were losing money. They were doing all of that. But and the mother might give out, and next thing, a black dog might come out to tell him stop playing the cards. Well, the worst fella of all was the turkey ghost, and the turkey ghost was bigger than you and I, and that was really saying stop gambling, stop losing the money, and lots of fellas that did it for the
They hated the turkey ghost.
Love
Never heard of the turkey ghost.
No, nor did I.
Shane, thank you so much.
Thank you. I love it. Every time you come in, I learn so many things.
Great.
It's great.
Shane, go
Thank you.
on the bar pod. Now we have a small bit of